And greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm joined here with Emery Moyna. This is going to be a nerd session. I'm just warning you all up front. And so, given that, I'm not offended if you find something more interesting tonight. But I'm doing this partly to do this for the record, to explain the paper, and also in about a week and a half, I'm making a presentation to a lot of Christian faculty in a private meeting. It'll be professors of biology, professors of math, engineering, and deans of various Christian schools. So I need to get very spooled up. So let me greet everybody. Godzilla Freak, it's been a long time. It's great to see you. Doki, it's always good to see you. And Matt, always great to see you, and thank you for being such a good and faithful supporter of my work on so many levels. Patrick Alexander, great to see you too. And Patrick asked, he said, I hope the debate went well. Well, let me explain what happened. It didn't happen. Skylar Fiction and Dr. Josh, who were, I believe they're atheists, they're expecting to see Mr. Batman, and it was me instead. And then I got word at the last minute that Skylar had a family emergency, so the debate got canceled. And I was really looking forward to it, but maybe that's just as well. And Dr. Dan here. This is actually going to be kind of really basic stuff. I'm just going to be explaining the paper because I need practice. I'll be presenting to Christian faculty, deans, professors of biology, mathematics, engineering. So I actually, the paper was long enough ago that I really am kind of rusty in understanding even what I wrote. And also I have the 3 other co-authors. So this will be so basic, also partly for my benefit. So thank you for asking about the debate, and it didn't happen. So I guess in that sense, I didn't lose. So with that, I did contact StreamYard and complained about some of the problems. We haven't completely figured it out. And I'm going to mention that for those who have been joining this channel for news about my church, McLean Bible, I am forming a new video channel just for that. And maybe it'll be online in 1 or 2 weeks. And that way I'll be able to preserve more of the focus, the original focus of this channel. I did not expect that. I actually thought that I'd be able to cover it just briefly, that we would win votes. It wouldn't have gone to the courts. And so now it's going to be a very protracted battle. It could get really ugly. The attendance is plummeted. And at this point, the situation's terrible for everybody. This is one battle where all the sides has lost a lot. So I'm going to be trying to go a little more toward kind of the science stuff for a while. As you know, my schedule is just so packed now. I'm not going to be able to do regular streams. However, now that I'm going to be appearing before about 30 or 40 faculty from Christian universities across the nation, I've got to actually get this talk in practice. So even though this is going to be long-winded, the audience I'll be presenting for is sophisticated enough. Some of the elementary stuff that I cover, it won't be there, but it's still good practice. So, Emery, feel free to introduce yourself, and then we'll get right to discussing the paper.
Sure. So I think probably most of you at this point know who I am. Emery Moyna in his image. You can see the whatever that term for that is, the cover image or whatever you want to call it. Logo. There's the word I want. Um, I have a YouTube channel, a blog that I write for once in a while, mostly during graduate school. I'm not doing a whole lot of writing, at least not blog writing. I'm doing a lot of writing. It's just not going into the blog. Um, and of course, I do put out videos. I try to get out one once a week. That doesn't always happen at this point, but I do try to get a video out once a week. I got one out a couple of days ago, and there'll be another one coming out. Oh, probably next week sometime. That's the plan anyway. I recorded 3 at a time, and I just got to get the time together to edit them. So, anyways, so if you like nerd science and you like creation and you like cultural issues, because I get into that stuff where Sal doesn't, feel free to drop by and see what my channel's about. So, anyway, back to you, Sal. Go ahead. Your mic's muted.
Yeah, so I found this picture. I never enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, but they have a volunteer organization where you actually get to fly Air Force airplanes on search and rescue missions. I flew one official Air Force mission, and we can do that through the Civil Air Patrol. Why am I mentioning that? McLean Bible is feeling like a battle zone, and I felt like I had to put my military gear on. So this was me. This is a picture of me in my Civil Air Patrol uniform. I was tempted to wear that to church because it's a battle zone there. And so the Civil Air, just FYI, the Civil Air Patrol in World War II was a combat unit. They have since, because they were so short of aviators, they recruited civilians to fly their own airplanes and observe and sometimes attack U-boats during World War II off the East Coast, in particular the East Coast. They've since become in a non-combat role and do search and rescue missions. They are the Air Force provides the airplanes now, and the civilians who are pilots volunteer. So the one time I had the one time I had my military uniform on. So that's a little that's just so I could close this window out. I was going to actually have another talk on McLean. So anyway, what was the purpose of our paper? What was the expectations of the editor? The editor really basically wanted to make a graduate resource, a resource for graduate students and professors on various mathematical topics. It was not a journal where we could just throw our opinions and try to be persuasive and try to tell people what we really think about evolutionary theory. That would have been totally inappropriate. And so we were in a situation where we had to try to provide value to everybody, meaning this is, if one is not a creationist or never would be a creationist, we wanted to have write basically a chapter that could be educational and would be of value to people, especially people who may not be population geneticists. So the audience would be people that just love math. And so that was a way that we could deliver a quality product, maybe give people a perspective on evolutionary biology, a critical analysis of it, because a popular version would be like what you read in Wikipedia, and I'm going to share a little bit of that. And that's not completely, if you actually read population genetic literature, it's not actually the case. And the Wikipedia article really reflects that. So we could teach people who are, may not have any particular, who may not be creationists, okay? But we could teach them a little bit. If they read the document, they would learn a lot about population genetics from kind of the pure math side, because the audience would be graduate students in mathematics. So we have that common language, we can deliver them something good. Now, why did the editor pick us? it's because Bill Basner and John Sanford wrote an article that broke all records in the journal Mathematical Biology, maybe by factors of 3 or 4. So that got on the editor's radar because the journal Mathematical Biology is a Springer publication. And this editor was working for Springer Nature, Switzerland. And I think it's just natural. He's just going to go to the various math-related journals and look at the most downloaded articles. I really think that that's how this all transpired. So we decided, you know, let us write this and just show excellence in what we do. I think if we convey the truth, everyone will benefit. And also, we could probably, you know, given who we are, we're not going to give evolution theory a free pass, meaning we will deliver. We're not trying to kind of cover up embarrassing facts. And the population geneticists, there are articles they themselves have written that you don't see in the popular press that are critical of their own theory. And so we wanted to show excellence in understanding, articulating their theory, and even adding some novel math that hasn't appeared in the peer-reviewed literature. And so we achieved those aims. Okay, so that's just for the general audience. For those who are in ID and creation, we feel that if you actually learn what population genetics says, you realize it doesn't solve anything in terms of the real problems of mechanisms for involving complexity, particularly integrated systems. And, you know, of course, my favorite is the eukaryotic cell. Its architecture with its membrane-bound organelles, it's like, it's very clear none of the population genetics math has any clue, offers any insight to how this could be resolved. So, do you have any comments, Emery? And I'm going to share a screen here. I'm going to share a screen here. If you have any comments while I bring this up.
Sure. I'm not a math guy. That's your department, Sal. But I'm having to learn some of the population genetics equations for classes that I'm taking. And I will be honest with you, I'm a little bit less than impressed. I mean, you can come up with a bunch of relative numbers, but you don't really get the numbers don't seem to provide. Now, again, I'm not a math guy, and I'm just kind of scratching the surface on this, but it doesn't seem to get into the areas that you would expect. Like, it doesn't seem to provide the kind of information that they want it to. Now, again, I'm not a math guy, and I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in what I have to say about this because, you know, I'm a little less than math heavy. But from what I can tell so far, it has been kind of it doesn't feel like it's accomplishing what they want it to accomplish.
Well, that's actually very accurate. So what had happened to me is the more that I studied the math, I said, this doesn't solve anything. It absolutely doesn't solve anything. In fact, internally, it has some problems. And I said, it can't be this bad. So I had conversations with my co-authors. I said, I wanted to say, okay, the math, as a math thing, it's beautiful, but it's totally irrelevant. So in that sense, it's just theatrical garbage. Then I said, I know that sounds outrageous. Is it really that bad? What are your opinions? And that was shared by some of the co-authors, that this is really bad stuff, parts of it. Now, there are parts that are really good, okay? But the part that you really need, okay, but it solves different problems than the real problem for evolution. Okay, so some of the really powerful stuff that we like genetic deterioration, we felt that was good. Some of the stuff with, when Dawkins is saying this is Fisher's theorem is biology's central theorem, it's like, and that's the popular stuff. So let me show the Wikipedia article here. And so this is the Wikipedia article on evolution. Sorry. And it says in the 1930s, pioneers in the field of population genetics, such as Ronald Fisher, after whom Fisher's theorem's named, such as Ronald Fisher, Sewell Wright, and J.B.S. Haldane, set the foundations of evolution onto a robust statistical philosophy. Okay. Emery, I could see you chomping at the bit there to say something.
Yeah. The funny thing about statistics is you can make them say anything you want them to say. You just pick the right statistical formula and you can output any answer you want. Now, obviously, I'm not accusing these men of lacking integrity, although maybe with Haldane being a lifelong communist, I should. But the point is more that people view statistics as if you quote a statistic or you solve something using statistics and, settled. Can't argue with it. Well, that you're making some assumptions. You're assuming that they use the right statistic for the job. You're using the statistic they use doesn't have hidden assumptions in it that are going to alter your results. You're assuming that the data that you are feeding the statistic meets all the assumptions of the statistic. Though that's a lot of assumptions in there, and that's just the ones those are the very general. Those are the very general possibilities where you could have problems, and each statistic has further things that you could get into. And so this is why when someone tells me that we got a robust statistical foundation for this, hold on, you can't just say that. You have to demonstrate that the statistics you use are relevant to the question, that the data that you feed them meets the assumptions of the statistics, and that the assumptions of the statistics are not influencing the conclusions. So go ahead, Sal. That's
okay, so there's some, let me say there are two big specialties of evolution that are talked about. One is phylogenetics, where we take organisms or parts of them, like say they're proteins, and we can arrange them in terms of similarity. And that's perfectly fine. So the assertion by evolutionists is that this is evidence of common descent, because it would be descent with modification, that it would naturally create these hierarchical structures. And as a creationist, as a card-carrying creationist, I'll say superficially, this is actually a pretty good argument. I mean, some creationists will disagree with me. I say, but it's like, trying to dismiss this is not a good idea. You have to try to deal with it as it is, because we clearly have patterns where we're more similar, say, to a chimpanzee than a tree. Okay, so phylogenetics at least does a good job of making these, arranging things in terms of similarity. The argument is whether this is proof of common ancestry or not. I would say, what I say is, the best argument against common ancestry is if we're able to show that the fossil record is young, or the Earth is young. Done deal. There's not enough time for evolution. It's just that simple. Trying to do it with statistics, it's like, well, at that point, I'd rather kind of be like Michael Behe and say, okay, I'm a creationist, but let's just think about a model where we assume common ancestry to be true. Would we still require miracles? And I would say yes. So you have the progressive creationists, you have like kind of a quasi-theistic evolutionist in Michael Behe, who would say, well, I accept common descent, but it looks like you need intelligent design. And even though that doesn't agree with me theologically, it's still closer to where I want someone to be than, say, someone like Swami Das, okay? it's a big step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned, because I was an old Earth creationist for a long time. So just trying to critique the phylogenetic trees is not going to be quite good enough, in my opinion, to make a convincing argument against universal common ancestry. You need other arguments to solidify that. So a lot of times I'll just say, okay, we'll just accept the phylogenetic trees. Now, population genetics. So we have a lot of evolutionary biologists, etc., are phylogeneticists at heart. That's just been my experience. They just love phylogenetics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'll throw similarities. Very few are population geneticists. So I'm saying you have the phylogeneticists, which to me is like the bulk of the evolutionary biology and evolutionist community. And yes, they see all these beautiful patterns of similarity and diversity. And you can build all these hierarchies. I've done it. And I have that's great. But then you have the population geneticists that have tried to build math that kind of, I don't think their goals were really well stated, but I think they're trying to show that they wanted to have a clear and simple message that things will evolve, particularly toward complexity. And as they began to kind of reevaluate all their math, they realized, no, it doesn't actually, there's no way it's going to prove that. Even if our theorems are correct, it doesn't prove that. And Richard Lewontin kind of came to that sobering realization. It's like, what are we doing? We don't even know what fitness really is. And we quoted Lewontin in the paper. And I helped write most of the section in our paper called Lewontin's Lamentation. And he's basically saying, what is this? And he listed 4 major complications of evolution. He said they need to be resolved. They're outstanding problems. And one of them dealt with the understanding and definition of fitness. And that's really fundamental. And the paper didn't quite connect all the dots. We didn't want to just say this is a disaster. We wanted to just reflect what people in the evolutionary community themselves, who are highly respected, like Lewontin said. We didn't want to go farther than that because, this we wanted something that would not embarrass the editor, would not embarrass Springer Nature, that this would be a contribution. So maybe we gave perspectives that are not in the popular press. As you could even see, Wikipedia saying this is a robust statistical philosophy. I'm just like, no. Did you even read the literature? So I mean, I'm challenging that. And then with our math, we actually showed that it's not robust, that there are issues with it. So that's where we might, in part 1, we might go to some of that today. I didn't have a chance to build out all of my presentations. So I'm just going to revert to something really boring, guys, which is going to be very basic stuff like mean and variance. It's like, why am I doing that? Fisher's theorem is basically relating mean and variance in terms of population genetics. But now as you study it, and this is something, when I was presenting this to creationists, they saw it right away. They said, this isn't relevant to anything. I said, that's exactly the point. See, now when you understand what the theorem actually says, it loses, we've demythologized neo-Darwinism. We can demythologize it by just openly criticizing it and lambasting it, or we could demythologize it by teaching what it actually says by their best authors. Now that's going to be harder work to do that. Ah, yes, smoke and mirrors. So when you actually study this, you'll say, well, how does that predict that something as complex as an eye will form. And you're like, yeah, well, that's exactly what I thought. So that really was our goal. So all you have to do is really just make an effort to teach it. And if you have a student of math who's a nerd, who's willing to just kind of go through the math because he likes equations and numbers, he'll start, he might be able to put two and two together and realize this is irrelevant to the real question. So yeah, it's going to be for a certain audience, but they'll start to see it. So what we actually tried to do is say, okay, we want to first demystify it so people will understand what it actually states and how they define fitness. And then the process of demystifying it, it will also demythologize it, because Dawkins has been using population genetics as if it solved the problem of the appearance of design, and it has not. So, and that's how we were able to publish the paper. We wanted to be of value to everyone. So it would mean a lot to me if someone read the papers that I've written, including this one. And even if they don't like kind of the bias that I obviously may show, I hope they'll come away and say, I'm really glad I studied this, because I have a lot better insight into what the issues are. And that really was our goal. It was a very modest goal. And that's how we were able to, quote unquote, get away with putting this in a peer-reviewed reference book. So if you have any thoughts, and while I queue up my next stuff, Emery.
I think that you're right. I think the best way to deal with the evolutionary literature is by using their own literature. When they use, when they write papers and when they write, books and so on, they tend to be a little bit more open about the problems with their ideology, even if they don't necessarily grasp sometimes what they're actually saying, but they tend to be a little bit more open and honest. And when they're a little bit more open and honest, rather than what they let be consumed by the general public, oftentimes they wittingly or otherwise debunk their own ideas. And the other thing is they tend to do a lot of fighting amongst themselves. I mean, that's a fairly standard human trait, because different people have different ideas and they want to promote their own ideas. But as they go about promoting their own ideas, they basically just hand the creationists a bunch of ammunition to go, hey guys, this is all the problems with his idea over there. And oh yeah, by the way, that's all the problems with your idea. So anyway, go ahead, Saeed. Are you ready to go?
Okay, so one way to kind of introduce everything is just to state Fisher's theorem. And it's equation 1 right here. And I'm going to just explain the symbols. The M with a bar over it is mean fitness. And so a lot of this talk tonight is just to describe how we calculate mean fitness. And then we have this variance in the variance of the fitness. And then we'll calculate that. And that's it. This is Fisher's theorem in a nutshell right there. But the problems of how to show where it falls apart, because there are lots of assumptions where this theorem will fail. The theorem assumes infinite population size, and we know that's definitely an idealization. Okay, The theorem will blow apart. It assumes that, like a constant growth rate, so a rabbit always, let's say your hypothetical rabbit that makes 4 offspring, every individual is going to have exactly 4 offspring, or like maybe at best on average 4 offspring. Doesn't change. So if there's an environmental change, that also blows apart Fisher's theorem.
Sal, can I just hop in here real quick to give a really relevant example? Fisher's theorem, even if you assume give them all the other assumptions, will not work this year. You know why? Cicadas. Those cicadas got eaten like crazy by birds. And you know what that's going to do to the bird population next year? Because they're going to be able to raise more young successfully because there's easier. They literally didn't have to move to find food. It would literally be falling into the nest. So they're going to be able to raise more young to adulthood.
Yeah.
So that right there, that one little environmental change. Oh yes, every 17 years we have it. That blows it up right there.
Right. Exactly.
Go ahead. That was just a very simple explanation that I thought everyone would get.
Excellent. Excellent. So you don't have, if you have real populations which are finite, Fisher's theorem blows apart. If you have environmental changes that change the reproduction rate, even temporarily, Fisher's theorem blows apart. If you add mutations, Fisher's theorem blows apart. If you add even more complex things like linkage and epistasis, Fisher's theorem blows apart. And this has been known, but still Dawkins say this is biology's central theorem.
So, Sal, I'm just going to make a point here. I actually learned Fisher's, now I knew this beforehand because I read Fisher's book, but I actually was given Fisher's equation today in lecture. It was part of my lecture that I read today. You know what was not said in that lecture?
What?
This theorem is fundamental to biology.
Dawkins needs
we spent half an hour on that theorem, and they never once said anything about it being fundamental to biology. Not once.
Dawkins needs some remedial training.
Yeah.
Although I doubt he's watching this channel, he'd actually learn something. But you see, he's made quite a living on promoting. Yeah, I mean, Fisher was just a minor part of it, but he's a lot of his promotion of what he does, particularly atheism, is based on Darwinism, and his viewpoints are kind of based on mythology.
Yeah.
Not kind of, they are based on mythology. And a small part of that mythology is thinking that population genetics has done this, because that's why he's saying it's biology's central theorem. I'm thinking now that he's one of the few people now that actually, he might be the only one that's saying that now. So, so all we're going to do then is maybe just work through some numerical examples of how we could show this. And you're going to, when I went through this, I said, huh? How can this prove anything? And then you're like, okay, well, let's look at some of the other population genetic theorems and claims. And it's all the same thing. It's like, even if we try to give it a little bit more realistic stuff with finite populations and mutations, you still don't solve anything. We were getting the points like, I was, one paper we cited in our paper was Grodwald, The Rise and Fall of Fitness Maximization. It was a beautiful theory. So the title of our paper was Fitness Maximization. And our conclusion was, it's not really our conclusion. The population geneticist said, one, it's not guaranteed to maximize. It's not guaranteed to maximize. And even if it does, what relevance does that have to biology as far as the evolution of complexity? And so those are the two main points of our paper. My job was to comb the literature because I sensed that someone had written this, and Bill Basner had found a lot too. I said, all we have to do is find it, because we know we have a good suspicion someone's going to tell the truth, someone of high rank. And all we have to do is to find their paper and cite it and let them say it in their own words. Because and then of course, when I would read these papers, my jaw would drop. I'm just like, are you like a closet creationist? I mean, you and I read one paper by, it was like, what's wrong with evolutionary biology? I was just like, my jaw is dropping. I'm just like, Are you really on their side? You know? So that's kind of the fun thing about some of these journal clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And let me show something. See if I still have it here. Let me show what actually are. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can just grab this out here. There was a paper in 2017, and it said these are the fundamental theorem of evolution. Let's see if I can just make this bigger so our audience can see it. So the fundamental theorem of evolution, according to this author, is Price's equation. If you don't understand it, don't feel bad. Even I don't understand it because I haven't studied covariances and I haven't studied Price's equation. So everything that we said of how all this can fall apart if you change this or that, I'm pretty confident that even this fundamental equation of evolution would fall apart. And even if, to the extent the idealization is true, it has no relevance to explaining, like, say, the evolution of complexity, like the complexity of the eye, the complexity of eukaryotes. But the George Price, there are two, actually, at least two people who are named George Price that are creationists. Amazingly, even though George Price, who wrote the Price equation and is famous in evolutionary biology, he was actually a creationist. He was kind of a very, very strange man, okay? How he could do that is amazing. But this kind of explains a little bit of our paper. If you can do the math, you can do the math and people will still receive it. George Price, being a creationist, he could still do the math. He could write equations. Didn't matter so much whether he actually, believed the biological claims. Like a lot of mathematicians, they're just enamored with just the equations. And I think my co-author, Bill Basner, kind of almost falls in that category. He's very enamored with the equations. And so you can publish in population genetics if you really love math. That's kind of the beautiful thing. We found kind of a back door to kind of demythologize neo-Darwinism because we had enough co-authors that loved math enough that we could talk that language and describe things. So this is Price's equation, and he was a creationist, but it's the fundamental, what one author called the fundamental equation of evolution. And from that, we derive all these other theorems, like the fundamental theorem of phenotype selection, this Robertson's equation, and fundamental theorem of gene selection, and the fundamental theorem of adaptation, otherwise known as Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. And this is what they call the discrete version, and I'm gonna cover that tonight. So I'm gonna just try to demystify all these symbols, and in the process of demystifying it, hopefully it can also lead to demythologizing. So yes, my goal is kind of like not very friendly to evolution, but let's say you have someone who's very much in favor of evolution and someone who's against it. We can find a middle ground and say, let's just deal with the numbers and let's just deal with these equations. And that's what our paper tried to do, and I'm going to do a little bit of that tonight. So why did I get interested in this? I try to argue apologetics at the college university level. I have to make the students there feel like I've struggled with them. There's something to be said when you're willing to suffer and walk in their shoes. When you're willing to walk in someone's shoes and you're showing that you care and that you struggle, they're more willing to listen to you. It's really that simple. It's really that simple. So what I've gone through and what I'm teaching here, it's not for everyone. It's not the way you would necessarily witness to every, there's, I gave a show, there's no one size fits all apologetic. So for me, the audience, the people that God has appointed me to be a witness to are university science students, university biology students, university math students, etc. And so there was a meeting one time on intelligent design. There were a lot of people there that knew population genetics. I said, this would be great if I could learn their language. And, I know missionaries, they want to learn the language of, like, say, Arabic, so that they can witness to Muslims or whatever language. So for me, the language that I'm learning is the language of population genetics, so I can talk that language to certain biology students. So now that I got that out of the way, Emery, while I get the rest of my stuff set up, if you have some words while I get this set up.
Sure. So I think Sal's has a point here. Now, he's right about a couple of things. First of all, you're not gonna be able to interact with everyone the same way, right? Different people have different understandings. Different people have different strengths and weaknesses. That you should still be giving them the same truth, but you may have to come at it in a different way. And this is something that I've seen the AIG people talk about, where they talk about, Acts 2 versus Acts 17, where you're talking to someone who has a Christian background, you can just give them the gospel. But if you're talking to someone who has a secular background, you're going to have to start at the beginning, because they don't understand what the term sin is. They don't understand what any of those things are. So you have to kind of start back there. But also it's important to be able to understand the language of the people you're talking to. If you're talking to a group of mechanics, it helps to understand how a car works or whatever it is they're working on. If you're talking to a group of engineers, it probably helps if you understand at least a few concepts about engineering. And this is not like changing what the truth is you're telling them. It's just maybe putting it in language and using analogies that they're familiar with. And this would also be true of the scientific fields. It helps if you have a background. It's not required, but it does help if you have a background that can put out analogies and explain things in ways and use the terms that they would understand. So at least that's my 2 cents on that. That and about $5 will get you a small cup of coffee at Starbucks. Prices aren't what they used to be. But anyway, so are you about ready?
Yep.
Awesome.
And this is from our paper. So this is, we're going to illustrate fitness, and we're going to give, now some people are going to, this is kind of a beginning, because we have our own specialized language for various kinds of things in fitness. So fitness means, the way it's defined in population genetics, is how many offspring you make that make it to adulthood and can reproduce. I mean, roughly. There are probably some nuances I'm missing.
So if you give me 30 seconds, I can run and grab and read you the definition of fitness that I was taught today as part of the lecture. So let me go grab my notes. I'll be right back.
Yes. So I'm going to read through the comments here. Yes, that's true.
Okay.
All right, so Emery's going to read from his textbook.
Yeah, I just have to find it really quickly.
Find it. Yeah. So I mean, I could read it too. The thing is that if I read it from the graduate level textbook, you just get all these symbols anyway. So I want to have kind of an English version.
Here's the verbal definition that I was given.
Okay, here we go.
As part of my lecture today. Fitness is the average contribution of biological entities to the gene pool of the next generation.
Can you read that again?
Sure. The average contribution of biological entities, by which he means organisms or groups of organisms, or because he's being very vague because he wants to put fitness at multiple levels, to the gene pool of the next generation. So,
okay, that wasn't all right. It's going to be funny because I could read from another textbook that doesn't describe it that way. So this is good because you get it one way.
mm-hmm.
I've seen it. All right. So from the mathematical standpoint, let me just go to Wikipedia here. I'm just going to just throw this up. We have what we call the Malthusian growth. They don't actually use the word, I don't know that they use the word Malthusian fitness, but, and I'm sorry if I'm going to confuse people a little bit, but basically we have this thing called the Malthusian growth model. It's sometimes called the simple exponential growth model. And so this is like a, it's kind of like a compounding certificate of deposit. So you throw money in the bank and they keep adding interest to it. And then over the years, it just keeps accumulating. Now, if you get a really nice high interest rate, that's great. I think, yeah, and if you use like what they call the rule of 72, which is an approximation, you divide 72 by the interest rate, that's how many years. So like if you have a 10% interest rate, which no bank gives that out, but just say hypothetically, in 7 years, you'll double your money. And so this, the Malthusian idea of fitness, it's kind of like an interest rate or a growth rate. And I'm just going to show it here. And that is, they're kind of stealth ways of showing this growth rate in population genetics. Right, so that's all I'm going to do for that. So let's just do something simpler and talk about a rabbit. So the green rabbits, every green rabbit, every generation, it's going to make, every individual makes 2 rabbits. So you have this rabbit here, the green rabbit. In generation 0, he has, just start off with 1. Okay, so we're going to do what I'm just going to call it a haploid model. These are hypothetical rabbits that you don't need a mother and father. They're all just mothers, okay? And to make things even easier, we'll say that they all have just 1 gene, or that all the other genes are identical and only 1 gene is, there's variation. We have different alleles of that gene or that locus, what we call locus, which is like the location on the genome. So that the gene that codes for color, we have an allele, which is a variation of that gene, one form of that gene that makes the rabbit green, another one makes it red, and another makes it purple. Okay, so this is setting up this simplification, and Felsenstein mentioned it. He said the initial models of Wright and Fisher were single locus, meaning single gene. They used the word locus to mean the physical location on the DNA. They were approximations and sometimes bad ones. So a lot of when I was reading through the literature, even of the 2017 paper, I was astonished. They said for quite a long time, the body of math it was so difficult to do multi-loci or multi-locus equations. A lot of the math just focused on 1 gene, 1 locus, and the alleles. I know that might sound astonishing. And so I'm going to just, in a sense, as I walk through this, people will balk. It's that's, why are you doing a haploid model and single locus? It's like, well, this is how it's taught in population genetics, because historically this is how some of this theory was developed, because you have to start off somewhere, okay? And what ended up I'm going to skip forward here. What ended up happening is when they went to the multi-locus models, things blew apart. that's when we started to have these problems. It's like fitness may never maximize. And we're not even going to get there. So today I'm just going to cover how, I'm just going to go to this illustration in the paper. And if you say, well, what's this doing in a graduate level paper? Well, we're criticizing the theorem, and it's best illustrated with the simple models here. So, and Emery, stop me if I, please stop me if I misstate something. So we could just say then that you have the green rabbit that makes 2, the red rabbit, every individual makes 5. So like in generation 0, it's just 1. Generation 1, it's 5. Generation 2, it's 25. And then this purple rabbit makes, every individual makes 10. So in the first generation, so in the, we call generation 0, it's, we just start off with 1. Generation 1, we have 10. And then in generation 2, we have 100. Obviously, I don't think we could fit all 100 in there. So we could say that this is more fit. It has a higher fitness score. And I'll show how we actually start to convert this into, there are various ways you can convert this into relative fitness and S coefficients. But in the comments, if does anyone, this shouldn't be complicated. You could see that the purple rabbit is considered more fit than the other rabbits. Is that, hopefully that's not too bad.
I get it. I mean, it's making sense to me. I don't know if it's making sense to everybody in the chat, but it's making sense to me.
Okay, so Bill and I had a little bit of disagreement on the notation. I like using capital letters for absolute fitness and lowercase for relative fitness. So I believe these are absolute fitness numbers. And when you read evolutionary literature, you'll see stuff like S coefficients. I'm not going to go into the conversion for that. But let me go to my paper now, because this paper, Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection, isn't fundamental after all. This was the part that was supposed to be included in the, this was the early version of our paper, because I said, well, let's just make this an educational paper. So for people that are outside of evolutionary biology, who are not even biologists, they may be just pure math students. You know, I said we can give them something of value if we just kind of acquaint them with kind of the literature, and so that they could understand it. And I noticed when I was reading population genetics literature, the math symbols were actually a little idiosyncratic, the way they did notation. And I had to actually translate some of the way that they represent things, the way the rest of the math world does it. So they're kind of even in their oddball way of doing mathematics in terms of their symbols. And it threw me off a little bit. So I'm going to, let me scroll through this paper. So now just imagine we're dealing with organisms that just have mothers. There are no fathers involved, and just really we're focusing on one gene, one what we call locus, one gene, and alleles, just to make the math simple. And so you could see here, briefly, this is starting to look like the Malthusian fitness that I showed from Wikipedia. We don't need to go there because I'm going to go into, you know, this explains the relationship of some of that. I'm just going to skip over that and go back to that rabbit example. So let's say we have 3 kinds of rabbits. One rabbit, each individual makes 4 kids. Another rabbit, it makes only 3, and another kind of rabbit makes only 2. Okay, anyone in the chat?
Sal, can I pause you for a second? Read Dr. Van's chats.
And Pop never came at once.
Up one.
Anyone want to guess how many times Fisher's fundamental theorem came up in my 6 years of grad school studying evolution? Any guesses? 0. Never came up. Not once. And PopGen was a huge part of my dissertation. PopGen, fitness, mutation spectra, mutation accumulation. Never came up. So is the fundamental theorem.
There you go. Good. Sorry.
Okay. So, now the reason I'm going into the fundamental theorem here is it's just one way to also kind of teach the basics of the definition of fitness. So whatever I show here, when you have stuff that deals with relative fitness, which is most of the population genetic literature, you actually now know the terminology. So what I'm doing here is not necessarily just to teach only Fisher's theorem, but just to kind of acquaint the ideas how fitness is defined in evolutionary biology. It's really tied to reproductive success. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole thing of how we convert the relative fitness into S coefficients. That's not, even in our paper, we didn't really need to go there. So, yes. Again, this was in a handbook of mathematics and the arts and sciences. So in a sense, we were covering something that had a lot of historical mythology surrounding it. So this would be of interest to people in mathematics. So just to get a feel for what some of the other chapters in the book were, they're looking at kind of like, there's a chapter on kind of the architecture of tiles and the mathematics of how the tiles. Okay, so this is definitely, again, Dr. Dan, this is not a book to really teach evolutionary biology. This is for almost, just kind of people that love math. And even if it were just historical examples, they would be just purely interested in it because it's mathematical. So we were able to get away with, okay, we could, we didn't have to make the case that this was so fundamental to biology. And the criticism of Bill Basner's first paper was, by Joe Felsenstein, was, well, we population geneticists, as Dr. Dan pointed out, we don't use it anyway. And so in this paper, I said, okay, we have to point that out, that this is really more or less a myth that was propagated by Richard Dawkins, because it's decoupled from reality. But that being said, let's just go ahead and explore the math behind it. And I actually learned some math in the process. Emery, if you had something to say.
No, I did. I do want to point out, though, that for those watching, anybody who may watch this later and not know who Dr. Dan is, Dr. Dan's not a creationist, okay? Dr. Dan is an evolutionist. Dr. Dan teaches evolution at a secular university. And I apologize, Dr. Dan. I should know what university you teach at, and I forget. I apologize. So,
Rutgers. Thank you.
For some reason, I was thinking Stanford, and I'm like, I know that's not right. Not that he's not smart enough to teach there, but I know that's not right.
My other favorite evolutionary biologist may have been a visiting professor there, Dr. Helen Fisher. So go on, Emery.
Yeah, but the general point is this whole idea that Fisher's theorem is somehow underlines all of biology is just, it's a joke. And the fact that we have this mythology that's out there that, oh yeah, we have Fisher's theorem, it actually means something. No, we don't use it. We hardly ever even read about it, let alone use it. It boggles my mind that Dawkins got away with promulgating that. Yeah. And nobody seemed to like either. I guess okay, to be fair, most of the people in the academia realm weren't reading his popular level books.
Yeah.
They were reading his peer-reviewed papers, where I'm sure he was more careful than that.
Well, it just goes to show that someone can really ride the tide of popular literature, and he's actually despised by the people that know what they're doing. But it wasn't really obvious because Dawkins really did have a great reputation. I mean, he was an Oxford professor, but then, we hear E.O. Wilson at Harvard saying he's just a journalist, he's not a scientist. I mean, ow. How that happened, I'm not going to get into that, but I think it just, well, the other thing that's really funny, guess who else promoted that myth? It was Fisher himself. He called it the fundamental theorem of natural selection. And he was saying that this is like thermodynamics, He thought he had something profound. I mean, the math is correct, but it describes something other than what he really wanted. But so the myth partly is because Ronald Fisher is just like a really respected statistician, mathematician, and scientist. So if he calls it the fundamental theorem of natural selection, it just has this aura about it. And well, he was the founder of neo-Darwinism, one of the top three, with J.B.S. Haldane and Sewell Wright. So, if he says this is fundamental, and then that myth was perpetuated by, I think someone might name Hamilton or something. Also, there are so many Hamiltons. So, I think even the creationists definitely got a little bit snagged into this and not realizing that, as Dr. Dan pointed out, most professional biologists could care less about it. So it was more or less kind of this mythology. And it's persisted a long time. It was only in 2018 at Fisher's memorial lecture that Joe Felsenstein, at Fisher's memorial lecture, he said, well, it wasn't a eulogy. I said, that's kind of good because it's kind of, I guess, not the greatest taste to say, we're here to honor the deceased, but his theorem is not really so fundamental after all. So yeah, Joe Felsenstein, 2018. So that would have been like on the order of the 50th memorial lecture. And he said, alas, Fisher's theorem is not so fundamental after all. And so that was, it's just like, how long has it taken for people to really come forward and point that out? So going back to this, so we can say in Felsenstein's book, he has more rigorous definition of absolute fitness. It is fecundity times viability. But in the simplified model, we could just say this is how many, in our kind of toy model, we could say it's just how many kids that particular individual that is associated with that particular allele in this single locus, single gene case, how many offspring that makes. So we could say rabbit number one makes, each individual in that population will make 4. And if he has allele number 2, or an individual that has allele number 2, you could say that he makes 3 offspring, and then allele number 3 makes 2. Okay, this is a simplified single locus haploid model with exact numbers of offspring. But then the theorem works better if you take these assumptions. Okay. Now we can do a relative fitness, and this was done. You could see this in population genetic literature. So all you do is you could take, it's customary, you don't have to do it this way. You could take the most prolific, the allele that is associated with most prolific individual, and just divide all the absolute. So we could call this the absolute fitness here. And if you divide it by all those numbers by 4, you can create what they call relative fitness. And Joe Felsenstein, customarily in his graduate level textbook, will make relative fitness with lowercase w's and or omegas, and uppercase to indicate absolute fitness. Is that kind of how they do it in your class? Or?
So in my, at least so far as I've gotten into the class, we aren't talking about absolute fitness at all. They're not even going to really discuss. I mean, they briefly mentioned it, but it was they're basically going to ignore it. But relative fitness is notated with a small w. Yes.
Okay. I'm glad we're having this conversation because Erica did ask me one time, she said, why don't you use relative fitness? I said, well, absolute fitness, you can actually have 0. And if the absolute fitness is 0, that means the population's extinct. I think that's kind of important. So,
yeah. And that is something, by the way, that I'm seeing in my book as well. They set up relative fitness so that something is always 1. And that the other things are less than 1 in comparison to that 1.
So I'm just gonna, I'm sorry, I don't have the page number off the top of my head. Where, let me see if I can have it. So just so you could see where I get this, I think it's just only fair. Absolute fit. See if I could find it. Okay, I'm getting warm here, I think, to where I want. I wonder what page this is. Oh no, I didn't. That's way too far. Let's see if I can get fecundity. Some will say it's fertility or fecundity. Apologies to the viewers if I'm just fumbling through this. So I got a lot of my definitions and conventions from Joe Felsenstein's book. And this is, by the way, it's very interesting how he defines selective advantage. It's in terms of or disadvantage. It's in terms of violations of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And I remember when I read that to you once, you're like, wow. It's
okay.
Yeah, let's see if I can. And again, guys, this isn't a, I don't know why it's not giving, it should, I should have found it by now. And I don't know why I'm not finding it. I thought I'd find it sooner than I am. Okay, natural selection, page 51. So let's go there. Page 51. Okay, natural selection. Okay, so this is from the top guy in phylogenetics and also population genetics, Joe Felsenstein. This is his free of charge graduate level book that he made available generously. It said natural selection can be viewed either narrowly or broadly. Narrowly conceived, it is simply one class of violations of the assumptions of the Hardy-Weinberg laws, namely the cases in which viability or fertility depend on genotype. And let's see, WA.
Okay, so let me now not to contradict Felsenstein, but the textbook I'm using in the lecture that I got today basically said that selection only works on phenotypes, but we use genotype out of convenience because genotype supposedly completely codes for phenotype. Of course, with the rise of epigenetics, that may not quite work as well as it used to. But so there's a I think either Felsenstein is just simplifying things down rather than having to explain that at that point, or Felsenstein and the book I'm using are in conflict over that point.
And it could be the models they're working from too. Okay, right. So he may revise that elsewhere. So I think as we're doing here, we'll start from kind of the simple case and then make a variation on it. Now I'm going to point out something, and I think we may or may not have put it in our paper. I hope we did. I mean, it was 70 pages. I can't remember every reference. But Alan Orr said that there are a staggering number of definitions of fitness.
That's true. Because I've actually researched that. That is 100%
actually, why don't
true.
I just see if I have Orr. That was the wrong
but
thing.
yeah,
to
there
search
are
for.
a lot of different ways to look at what fitness is, and some of it depends on context. Because if we're working with relative, and it depends on what you mean too. If you're talking about relative fitness or absolute fitness, or
I did cite Orr in my paper, and that there's staggering number of definitions of fitness, Alan Orr, and I have the reference here. Let me see. Yes, in my paper, which was on the cutting room floor, it was basically was going to be in the big paper. Let me highlight it here. It says, in order to understand the meaning of Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection, it is helpful to understand the definition of fitness which Fisher was using. This is not so trivial a problem because in a 2009 paper on fitness, Alan Orr quipped, biologists have offered a staggering number of definitions of fitness. And worse, Richard Lewontin lamented, it is not entirely clear what fitness is. Okay, so the fact that we're fumbling through this a little bit is reflective of the fact that depending on what you're trying to do, sometimes you'll have a slightly different definition. But this is the passage from Felsenstein's graduate level Theoretical Evolutionary Genetics. And here he says, this quantity composed of viability, VA, and fertility is the absolute fitness or Darwinian fitness of genotype A. We call it WA. So now if we go to my paper here, you'll see I use that convention there, absolute fitness, with like a capital W and then like a 1, 2, or 3, where you could say, you can use subscript A or whatever. I didn't decompose it in terms of fertility or fecundity and viability equals WA. I just used the capital W. So that's, if people are wondering how I got that, this is where I got it. Any questions? So you don't see that convention used in your book? Sort of.
The W sub A, no. What I see, the way the convention works in my book is they use convention letters rather than A for the particular allele. So what they'll use is they use the letters I and J. That's what I've been using.
Okay.
But it's the same type of notation. They're just changing the lettering.
Yeah, I could tell we're going to have fun here.
Mm-hmm. Again, there's no standard notation. There's no standard definitions. There's no really standard anything. It's just all kind of floating up in the air. And this is why it's very hard to have conversations about this, because everybody's working with a different definition and different notations.
Yeah, and even my co-authors, we had to work through that. Okay, so I'm just pointing out here where my source documents were to come up with this toy example. So that's taken 30 minutes to get this far. And then Felsenstein, then he describes how to make relative fitness. There's a transformation here. It's in this book, Theoretical Evolutionary Genetics. So just in case, so you could see here he has examples of absolute fitness, relative fitness. It's in the book here, so I'm not going to belabor it. And so you can see the transformation I made. Now, in evolutionary literature, you'll hear a lot of times about S coefficients. That's another layer of re-representing this, but I'm trying to keep it simple, so we'll just go with this simple. So you said you use lowercase w for relative fitness in your textbook.
Yes.
Okay. So just beware here that fundamentally we have the rabbits that have 4 kids each and 3 kids each and 2 kids each representing different alleles. But we can also do it in terms of relative fitness. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. We can now calculate what we call mean fitness. And so I'm sorry. So we started with this table here with the absolute fitness that we just assigned to each allele. This is just a hypothetical example. We can convert it to relative fitness. And then now we can calculate this thing called the mean fitness. So this is central to Fisher's theorem. We need to understand what mean fitness is. And it's just tedious. It's not like it's killer to understand. We can go to Wikipedia pages that describe how to calculate the mean. So the audience I'll be talking to in a couple weeks, they're sophisticated enough to understand the mean. But I have a spreadsheet where I did this. Let's see if I can make this bigger so we can see. So let's say hypothetically, let me see if I can get my hypothetical example.
And just for the record, Sal, I'm kind of reading through what you're putting on screen as it goes through. I'm recognizing a lot of the symbols and a lot of the notation. I will point out, though, that one thing that has not been mentioned to me in my class, which I didn't realize until you started talking about it, was that this is talking about an asexual population with no recombination.
Yes. Yes.
Which is a giant problem.
Okay, just historically, I mean, seriously, because this is where my co-authors were discussing. John said when he was studying population genetics, he was kind of astonished that they focused so much on the one locus models. Mm. And that, it's tedious. It's not mathematically deep. It's just tedious. Mm. And you have all the theorems with these one locus, very simple haploid models. Once you add just a little complexity, like say multiple loci, and then you go to the diploid model and you have recombination, it starts to get a little nastier. Mm-hmm. You add linkage and epistasis, just totally blows up. Okay. It doesn't take long for this to start to become nasty. Yeah. It's tedious at first. It's kind of manageable.
Yeah, the math that we're looking at so far is not too bad. But if you get it into anything higher than that, and you're gonna, right. I don't even want to think about that math. And yes, so, Dr. Dana, right. I recognize the reason that they keep it simple at that level.
Well, okay, so for the viewers, historically speaking, they really did focus on the one locus model for a long time. And then Joe Felsenstein, and we quoted him in our Springer Nature paper. He said the locus, Fisher and Wright's one locus models were approximations, sometimes bad ones. And then historically, we also quoted from Grodwell's 2017 paper. And he points out that what had happened is everything worked so beautifully for the one locus model. They thought they could extrapolate it to the multiple loci model. They were shattered. It was a different ball game. And this is the thesis of this paper. It was the rise and fall of fitness maximization. So the title of our paper was Fitness Dynamical Systems and Fitness Maximization in Evolutionary Biology. So we actually traced that history. You went from the one locus model, everything's kind of beautiful. Granted, it's not necessarily relevant to biology, but the math is at least beautiful. You get these nice inevitable rises of fitness. Historically, when they went to the multi-locus models, they were horrified at what they found. They said, we can't make this work. And there is a passage in Joe Felsenstein's book where he gives the pathological example that Patrick Moran ginned up, and it was a nightmare. They said, why don't I quote it in our paper? Let's see if I can find it. Moran. Here it is. Okay, so this is why you like one locus models, but this is what happens when you get to multi-locus models or multi-locus. I don't know what the correct term is. Is it multi-locus or multi-loci?
Multi-locus is what I've been hearing, so I'm going to go with that.
Okay. Joe Felsenstein. Okay, so this is from Basner, Cordova, Sanford, and Hosner's paper, our paper. Joe Felsenstein eulogized the quest for fitness maximization in this way. This is 1989. Now I quote him. With enough information, population genetics can be extraordinarily powerful. It is when we must generalize over a wide range of possible models that the intractability of the mathematics becomes infuriating. Sewell, Wright, and R.A. Fisher derived results that seem to imply that natural selection would act so as to maximize the mean relative fitness of members of a population. It did not take a new generation of theoreticians long to discover holes in this. Systems of linked genes can evolve steadily away from the maximum mean fitness. Even Fisher's and Wright's one locus equations turn out to be approximations, sometimes bad ones. If we could discover what quantity was being maximized, it might yield some insight in how the details of genetic systems compromise adaptation. After 20 years of effort, 20 years! After 20 years of effort, there's been no great progress on the central problem. The genetic system is not designed for the convenience of mathematical theorists. Thank you, Lord. I'm sorry. I think something just kind of slipped out there, Joe.
I have to say, the fact that that even our best mathematicians can't get a handle on the genome really speaks volumes.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I just can't help it. So after 20 years of effort, there's been no great progress on the central problem. The genetic system is not designed for the convenience of mathematical theorists. All theory has done is disprove postulated generalizations. The mathematical tools at hand have not revolutionized our understanding of the evolutionary process. Many evolutionists will fail to find the clear and simple messages that population genetics theory once seemed to promise. And then we write, a crippling blow to the generality of fitness maximization was, as Felsenstein said, the problem posed by linked genes in multi-loci models, which did not even incorporate the effects of new mutations. So even without adding mutations, if we have linkage and what they call epistasis, okay, so we write, though it would seem reasonable that a multi-loci diploid system would maximize fitness as naturally as in the single locus haploid case, the complication arises from the phenomenon of linkage described in the section on Mendelian inheritance, and also a phenomenon called epistasis. Epistasis is a phenomenon where the fitness of an allele at one locus is affected by the density of alleles at another loci. Up until now, it was assumed WI, fitness, is constant, but when WI is variable and worse, is dependent on the density of alleles at another loci, the model is no longer guaranteed to maximize fitness. In single locus haploid models, these complications do not apply, but in multi-loci diploid models, they thwart the hope that mean fitness always maximizes. Briefly, if a beneficial allele at one locus is tightly linked to a deleterious allele at another locus, the beneficial allele at one locus pulls along the deleterious allele at the other loci such that both are either amplified or lost. And then we highlight this. In his paper, The Theory Was Beautiful Indeed, Rise and Fall and Circulation of Maximizing Methods in Population Genetics, from 1930 to 1980, Jean-Baptiste Grodwall gives an excellent review of the effort to find fitness maximization in general in population genetics and the eventual rejection of the concept. They rejected the concept. Grodwall wrote, "This ambition, that is, to demonstrate fitness always maximizes, came to a halt in the context of the influential objections made by the Australian mathematician Patrick Moran in 1963. By adding epistasis and linkage, Patrick Moran demonstrated fitness is not guaranteed to maximize. Joe Felsenstein, in his graduate textbook, Theoretical Evolutionary Genetics, the one we were just looking at, by the way, recounts an exact recipe of Moran's counterexample with a mere two loci system. Felsenstein comments on the consequences. It is easy to show that not only can recombination lead to a continual decrease of mean fitness during the course of evolution, but it leads to an equilibrium state which has lowered mean fitness." So much for recombination. Saving the day. And then it says here, I'm just going to, okay. In addition to Patrick Moran, Richard Lewontin also explored the challenges posed by linkage and epistasis. He was among the first to employ computers and numerical simulations to do this. Grodwall comments on Lewontin's life work. In his youth, Lewontin had believed in maximizing methods and put them to work. He strove to consolidate them, and he refashioned them to tackle the study of more complex systems. Having lost faith in them, he then became their foremost critic, repeatedly taking issue with grand generalizations in evolutionary biology and sociobiology. So really that kind of summarizes, kind of in a broad overview, the theme of our paper. It's like, you know, to be responsible, we need to communicate this. And that's why Bill Baser and I were combing this literature. It's like, this is interesting mathematically, just independent of its value to evolutionary theory. This was just very interesting mathematically, because I would have thought that, you know, if you maximize one locus, you could maximize multi-locus or multi-loci systems. And that was historically what was believed. I mean, to me, it's just like a reasonable generalization, but I guess the reality was sobering. And as Joe Felsenstein said, the genome's not designed to make it easy for mathematicians. Let me highlight some things. Yeah. So, and Dr. Dan, I really do look forward to having a discussion about this. So, we really didn't try to, you know, we could have added a lot more commentary, and this wasn't going to be a creationist tome or tract. You know, we tried to just let experts like Felsenstein and Moran and Grodwall kind of just speak. We didn't try to offer commentary. Obviously, we believe certain things of what this implies, but by and large in our paper, I think we tried not to say this was totally useless, even though some of us may feel that way. You know, we wanted to be guarded in our language, and let the readers make those conclusions. Yes, and I thank you for looking at this. Now, I will say this. Personally, I wanted to be more guarded in language. My co-author, Dr. Sanford, he's a little bit more aggressive. He wanted to just say, yeah, it's really, so there's a little bit of tension there. I wanted to be more guarded in the language. And because we also didn't want to get this rejected, I said, just the way it was stated, I felt was informative for anyone that is a student of these topics. They should know this. I would hope that they'd be glad that we informed them of this. And it is, after all, in Joe's textbook. So, so going back to the single, oh dear, yeah, the single locus model. So, okay, so we jumped ahead kind of really fast. But I just wanted to show, okay, this example, we're going to just focus on the single locus because it's easy to understand. The theorems are beautiful. They work nicely. What Bill Basner did is he then went to the multi-loci, the multi-locus model with mutations, and that gets really nasty. And we're able to demonstrate certain things with that. So we could either say that Fisher's theorem could fall apart if we have linkage and epistasis. And the quotes I just gave show that. And Felsenstein gives an example in the book that would break, the idea that inevitable. So it wouldn't necessarily break Fisher's theorem. It would break the idea that fitness always increases. So if you add linkage and epistasis, even if the theorem's true, it no longer maximizes. And that, that was kind of heartbreaking for the population geneticist. But there's another way to attack this. If you add if you make the populations finite, you could also break inevitable maximization.
You could do a lot of things to break inevitable maximization.
Yes, exactly. So we could create a laundry list. What Basner did, which I think was unique, this is Bill Basner and John Sanford's contribution. Let's see if we could break it with mutations. So it's like, it's like kind of beating a dead horse. But we're just kind of creating kind of mathematical, I don't know. If you love the math, you like to do it just as an exercise, okay? So whether we proved, as far as mathematicians go, sometimes they're actually offended if you find some utility in what they actually devised, okay? All right, so, I mean, that's just the way they're wired. And so just accept it for that. Again, this was a math book. This book was not a commentary per se on evolutionary theory or anything, or biology. This is just presenting math. And so someone that really likes the kind of differential equations, which was Bill Basner's specialty in his PhD, they will just appreciate it for the math. That's probably, it's like, okay, this is how people in, with our worldview can kind of build a bridge with people with other worldviews. We could speak the language of math and just let the equations be what they, for what they are. But we were able to insert and highlight some things that were already in population genetic literature. So, yes, you laughed about what I said about the mathematicians. See, wasn't this so much better than my possible debate on the Old Testament? I think this is more fun anyway. I love studying the Old Testament, not debating it with atheists. Anyway, so let's just say now we have something known as computed relative fitness with our example, the relative fitness of the rabbits. We also have the absolute allele proportions. So we could say that we have the, we could start at generation 0 at the beginning of kind of our mathematical adventure, where the individual with the number 1 allele will have just one individual to start off with. The one with the number 2 allele has 2, and the one with the number 3 has 7. So again, maybe that's a little bit like, that's just a variation on the rabbit picture way up here. Bill started the rabbit picture with one of each. I'm starting it with different numbers. Hopefully you don't have any, shouldn't be any problem with that. We can also kind of do the same trick. See if I do it. We can make it relative proportions. We can do it, you just take, you sum up like 1 plus 2 plus 7, that equals 10, and then you divide each of the numbers by 10, and you get the relative population frequencies. We could call it gene frequencies. The proper term is allele frequencies. So this is the allele frequency. And Felsenstein points out, there's some conventions that are kind of stuck, whether we're, we really should use the term allele, but we use gene. He said it's kind of embedded in literature. So if we can calculate, if we have numbers for, if we have numbers for the allele frequencies and the relative fitness, we can now calculate the mean fitness, which I showed the formula here, right here, equation 14. So I'll just show the spreadsheet where I had that. So we have the absolute fitness. Please stop me, Emery, if I lost you.
No, I'm tracking.
And if you could monitor the chat in case I lose someone.
Sure. Yeah. So guys, if anybody, if something is not making sense, ping me, not Sal.
Okay. So see if I can make this just a little larger. So we have, I built this spreadsheet. So we have the absolute fitnesses here of the alleles 1, 2, and 3. We have the initial population. We have the population, exact population numbers, 1, 2, and 3. And we have the total number of individuals in the population, which is just the sum of this. So you could see here 1 plus 2 plus 7 equals 10. And then likewise for all the other rows. So like, just to show how this works, individuals that have allele number 1, each of them have 4 offspring with each reproductive cycle. So in cycle 1, you have, in generation 0, you have just 1 individual, but then the next, generation 1, it's 4, and then each of those 4 have 4. So you can see how the population grows. And then likewise for individuals with the number 2 allele, let's just go with the individuals with the number 3 allele. Each of them will have 2 offspring each, because the absolute fitness is 2. And in Fisher's, in this model for Fisher's theorem to work, we want the absolute fitness to be the same for every generation. So every individual will have 2 kids. So the initial population at generation 0 is 7. Generation 1, the next generation will have 14, the next will have 28, so on and so forth. I don't think that's terribly difficult. It's just tedious. Is that,
yes?
Did I lose anyone?
That's
just tedious.
It's very tedious, but it is not. It's not too complicated if you have a general understanding of math.
Right. So then, with all that knowledge, we can calculate relative gene frequencies or allele frequencies. That's simply just dividing, like say, the number of individuals like that by this number. And so we'll get allele frequencies across generations. We can also, the relative fitness, we calculated that, that's constant across all generations. And then we can multiply the gene frequency by the relative fitness. And then when we add we do that for each individual. We add it up, we get the mean fitness, which we call W bar.
Yes, and that's the same notation that I use.
Okay. So are we bored enough yet? Okay, so that it's just tedious, guys. Okay, like I said, this is part of the Christian witness. We're walking in the shoes of some of the people we're trying to witness to. And so this is, I had to create this spreadsheet. So if it was boring and tedious for you to listen to me describe it, it was boring and tedious for me to create it. Okay. So you just get these numbers, just numbers. I mean, and we just go on like that. And then we can calculate variance. And I'm not going to torture you guys too much. Just suffice to say, let me just show. I have a Wikipedia entry on variance. Yeah. Let me show this Wikipedia entry on variance. And there's a particular way that it's stated here that I like. So if I just go to the Wikipedia entry on variance here, I want you to focus on this last form here, where we have this E, and it's x squared, and then E, you take EX and then square it. It's basically the same idea here. I'm just relating this to what you would see in Wikipedia. So this is just kind of a nasty thing to do. What we did here, when we were multiplying the gene frequency by the relative fitness, what we have to do is we have to square the relative fitness and multiply it by the gene frequency. And then we add all that up. And then we take this thing here and square it. And we just pump this through. This is just grinding through. Okay, this is just not pleasant. Variance, to me, it's sort of a measure of the diversity. Or we could say that's not really a good description. I think statisticians are going to cringe. But it's a number you get based on the diversity. It's a little more complicated than that. What is it exactly? Unfortunately, it's equation 15. But if you want kind of an English language description, your diversity is going to affect the variance. If you have very low diversity, you're not going to have a lot of variance. Do you have any problem with that? If you have, let's say you had no diversity, your variance would be 0.
Yep.
Okay. So the more diversity you have, the more likely you are to have a higher variance number. And so it's just kind of that's probably one of the nastier ways. So I just had to put these. So yes, I had to actually, when you see those mathematical equations, I actually had to create all these spreadsheet entries. So you could see now, to be able to implement, so you see equation 14 and 15. If I'm going to do a calculation for just those 3 alleles with 3 relative fitnesses and 3 gene frequencies, I'm already getting up to like 26. I'm getting up to how many? Yeah, I've already exceeded, I'm running alphabetic letters, 27 calculations just to grind through that math. And so we're going to end up with one number. Let's see if I get it. Yeah. So we're, let's see what is the variance. So the green number there is really important. So this is the mean fitness here when I say W bar. And the reason I call it W bar is you see like this W with a bar over it. So I'm going to calculate that. You just get one number like that per generation. And then you get a variance number, which is this one here. So when you pump all this through, me see. There's one other thing I need to add. One other thing. It's the change in mean fitness. So it's defined a little differently depending on what text. I just did this to make it a little easier. So let me go over here. You could see that in each generation, the mean fitness changes. Okay, that's not hard, right? And so we can say that there is a change in going from generation 0 to generation 1. We could say, the way I defined it, the anticipated change in mean fitness is going to be that figure in this column. We could either do it forward or backward. I decided to do it kind of forward. So we have this quantity called delta bar. And all I do, to get the delta W bar number in generation 0, all I do is I just subtract this, like 0.6 from 0.645833, and then so on and so forth for the rest of the rows. It's not hard. It's just tedious. So I'm sorry that I'm having to walk you through that. So these are the 3 important quantities to understand what we call the discrete version of Fisher's theorem. You just need the mean fitness, you need the variance, and then you need the delta, the change in mean fitness. You have change in mean fitness, variance, and then mean fitness itself. And then you're in business, because Fisher's theorem says, let's see if I can finally find it. The change in mean fitness, that delta W bar, is the variance divided by the mean. That's the discrete version. The continuous time version is different. That's it. So you grind through all that number. So it's just saying we can make the number on this side equal the number on that side. That's it. And then, of course, when I did that, I said, well, what does this solve? And that's probably what a lot of people are saying. Well, what does this solve? And it's like, okay, well, let's go to other population genetics models. What does it solve if you even maximize fitness? Because later in our paper, we said the problem is, let's say losing vision, losing eyes, like a blind cavefish, is increasing your fitness. What does that solve in terms of describing how complexity evolves? And that was kind of what Lewontin was beginning to allude to. He said, what have I done all my life, as far as trying to see if we can maximize fitness? Even if we could, what do we actually create? What does it actually describe? So that was kind of a painful way of showing the discrete version of discrete, meaning, each generation, all the mothers will have their kids exactly at the same time, right? Because the model is simpler. We have what we call the continuous time version, which is more complex. The derivation and proof of that's a little more challenging. But that's basically Fisher's. That's the most simple version of Fisher's theorem for the haploid single locus case. Any comments there?
No, I'll be honest with you. Some of that math is a little bit over my head. I'm only about partway through my current course.
Okay.
So, but from what I can get, like, I'm not sure that the math actually solves anything.
Correct. It is, the math guys will just love it. It's like, that's a very interesting tautology. All math is tautology, and you can do some wonderful things if you can find a way to make the tautology useful.
Yeah.
And as in R.H. Brady's paper in our discussion, when you can translate a tautology to make a synthetic statement, then it becomes really powerful. And that's what physics is very, very good at. It's converting tautologous statements into synthetic statements in the real world. So you take a tautologous mathematical statement and then convert it into the real physical world and start to see relations that can make synthetic statements, which is very powerful. So like if I build a machine that can control electromagnetism this way, we can make radio waves. That's the way to convert the math into something that actually is a predictable and falsifiable scientific or engineering theory. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So the idea is you'll see Fisher's theorem in the more complex case. You're just dealing with the mean fitness and a variance, mean fitness and variance. And I'll just show that in Dr. Basner in our paper. It really is Dr. Basner's baby. So you could see he borrowed some stuff from my paper here. He used slightly different notations with uppercase. See that looks a lot like this one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very similar, yes.
Yeah, I kind of like the lowercase. He said, but I need the lowercase for something else. I said, okay, all right. So again, a little bit of notational difference. So I'm the one that dug that one up, and that was, I'm glad Bill adopted some of my convention, because the one in Felsenstein's book is a little funny. So basically the essential portions is you want to have a mean fitness, a change in the mean fitness, and then a variance. Those are the three components for the discrete version. Now, if you don't have the discrete, generations, which is very artificial, you do things a little different. All you need is kind of this incremental change in the mean fitness and then a variance. So it's still, this is Fisher's theorem right here in what we call continuous time. The proof of this wasn't stated in our paper because George Price, Price's equation fame, had already derived that. He'd proven it. And actually that proof was much later than when Fisher first stated his theorem and no one understood it for like 50 years. Price wrote it in a way that you could understand and also prove it. And so it might be a little astonishing. We didn't state the proof. You have to actually look it up. And so Bill here is borrowing some of my notation here. So again, if you can calculate variance and mean fitness, you can sort of understand Fisher's theorem. So the change in mean fitness is equal to the variance. And if you look at what Fisher actually stated on the Wikipedia page, you begin to see some of that. So mean fitness is actually a pretty important thing. So if for nothing else that we've gotten out of this, we have some idea how mean fitness is calculated for a single locus case. It starts to get nasty when you try to aggregate multiple genes. Mean fitness then takes on, you have to do a lot more machinery. So you thought that was tedious with just one locus. Just imagine you have multi-locuses now with multiple alleles.
My head is already hurting, Sal. Don't make it worse.
Okay. So
no, I'm just pointing out how much more complicated that would be. That was a joke.
Yes. So I'm just explaining to the readers, that's exactly why when we go to the multi-loci models, you start to get nasty looking math like this. Okay. Remember I said going from one locus, one gene to multiple genes, it gets nasty real fast. And so let me just page through this. God bless you, Bill. I don't know. I mean, you have to love math to want to just torture yourself with this. I mean, to him, it's joy, okay? I can imagine Bill just so eager to get home at night and wanting to just do these calculations. That's a true mathematician.
I feel bad for his wife.
Okay, so
For the record, that's not a statement on the state of Dr. Basner's marriage. I just feel bad for his wife if that's what he enjoys doing.
I do know, I think I know, I can't speak for Bill, but I do know some math guys that are almost that bad. Okay. One time we were in the college cafeteria, and there's me and then two guys who really love math, and I was never in that category. And they were just talking about something about ring theory and abstract algebra, and they were just conversing and conversing. And a girl joined us. She stayed there 2 minutes and then ran away. So now I'm going to show Bill Basner's version of, so Fisher's fundamental theorem is just this part here, right here, that I'm kind of, hopefully you could see me circling it. And then his correction here is Fisher's fundamental theorem with mutations. So you add the mutations here, and that's what the theorem looks like. So that was his contribution, and it took all this nastiness to arrive at that. But what I tried to show is, it's just tedious. You're just calculating mean and variance, and then you're creating all these theorems surrounding mean and variance. So after all those gyrations, and then we'll wrap this up for this part of the talk. It's like, what did we actually figure out? Well, for Bill, adding the mutations, if you have enough, fitness will not maximize. It'll be in a steady decline if you add mutations. But as I pointed out, if you have linkage and epistasis, you could get a decline. But if you throw enough mutations, you're guaranteed a decline. I think that was a stronger statement than what we had in Joe Felsenstein's book. But there are easier ways, and I told Bill, I said, there's probably an easier way to kind of demonstrate decline. And I did that in the paper with the Poisson distribution. It's an alternative way to demonstrate genetic entropy. So you could try to work from Fisher's theorem and try to illustrate genetic entropy. It's kind of clunky, okay? I didn't think it was the most elegant way, but hey, mathematicians may not necessarily be. It's like, why don't we try? Seriously, I had a friend here. His professor said, okay, you can prove this in two ways, the easy way and the hard way. I want you to, okay, the easy way is if you use complex numbers, imaginary numbers. So the hard way is you do it with real numbers. I said, I want you to do it with real numbers. Okay, so again, this is a math book, and Bill was showing how we could kind of take genetic entropy type themes in the context of Fisher's theorem. And we've had discussions, I said, Bill, this is not the most elegant way, but he said, oh, it's, he said, well, I really wanted to do it with Fisher's theorem. So there are any number of ways to try to argue genetic entropy. I kind of like the way Muller did it, and I covered that. I put that in our paper for Springer Nature, the way Muller did it, and then maybe that might be the subject of the talk next time. But because Fisher's theorem was about 20 pages of our paper, I felt it was important to cover it, and because I talk about it, but it also, even if Fisher's theorem weren't the focus, we still had to learn what mean fitness is and what variance is. But let me just throw this out for the viewers. I want you to ponder this. Just because everyone is, let's say you have a totally clonal population, that's maximally fit, according to the definitions we have here, right? It has your most fit allele is now fixed in the population. So what do you do? Do you really think that now that you have a clonal population that this is really fit, where everything's identical? See, this raises kind of like, how does the mathematical definition line up with reality? I mean, what do you think? If you have a clonal population, is that necessarily a good thing for that population?
I could see a lot of potential for bad things coming out of a clonal population, like negative mutations getting fixed very easily.
Yeah.
Inbreeding, well, except it's not inbreeding, it's just cloning bad stuff. And yeah, I can see all kinds of negative. But see, if that is the maximization of fitness in a clonal population, evolution then has to explain why all organisms are not clonal, given that the original organisms were clonal according to the evolutionary model.
Yeah, so I began to ask those questions. I said, okay, so now that this fixes, okay, let's say we maximize every locus in the genome. Now everything's clonal. That's all you've done. Have you? Oh, I know now why I just put that out there. I said, does that mean you've necessarily made complexity? No. All you've done is you've made clones. You've made a clonal population. That's all you've achieved. That's all that. So if we say, for the sake of argument, that the population somehow maximized fitness at every gene locus, somehow it did it, what have you accomplished? What has that population accomplished for itself? They're all identical. It doesn't mean that necessarily the eye will evolve or any of these complex organs.
No, and if you introduce mutations into that perfectly maximized system, there is a large possibility you'll swing away from that equilibrium and lose fitness.
Well, there's another thing. If you figure out a way to kill one, you can kill them all. And
also true. Yeah.
That's why populations that are identical are particularly vulnerable to environmental perturbation, because they're all identical. So if they all use this identical same food source and could only eat that one food source, what happens when you change?
Koalas, anyone?
Yeah. Okay. So I think what happened when I was looking at the math here, I said, Dr. Sanford, let's say hypothetically all we did was, let's hypothetically maximize fitness for every locus, for every loci. Have we accomplished anything? And is the population really fit in the sense of, like, you know, like, let's say someone's trying to do, what do they call it? Conservation biology. In conservation biology, you do not want clonal populations.
No.
Okay.
In conservation biology, you want as much heterozygosity as you can get, generally speaking, to fight against inbreeding.
Yeah. See, now I'm glad we're having this kind of rehearsal, because when I make my presentation to the faculty, it's like, I'm going to just throw that out there. I said, what if you hypothetically maximize fitness for every gene loci, or gene locus? What does that accomplish for the population? And the point being is, that kind of renders like it just kind of, to me, that makes it poignant example. It's like, what is all this math actually demonstrating? Even if hypothetically the population geneticists achieve their dream of demonstrating that fitness will maximize naturally, which would mean at some point the population's clonal. What does that prove in anyway? Maybe that's a poignant way of stating that there are two levels of problems. One, it doesn't maximize anyway. It's not guaranteed to. Second, what if it did maximize? What does that say about the population you get? All you've demonstrated is they're all identical. It doesn't mean complexity is going to go up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so this whole thing in the Wikipedia entry that said we've put this on a robust statistical foundation. I was like,
it is a
Yeah.
robust statistical foundation in the same way that I am the king of China.
I mean, you know, I like Dr. Dan and Dapper Dino, but I'm just like, you know, I like getting along with people, you know that.
You're telling me.
But
I'm just teasing.
You know, I would just pose questions like that. I said, where's population? This is supposedly neo-Darwinism is based on this whole stuff with maximizing fitness. And this is why this is probably a really devastating thing that kind of like no one wants to talk about. Because the real problem is not maximizing fitness anyway, as we've just covered.
Right.
The problem is evolving complex systems. And I think studying the math, I was just like, what are you guys doing for 100 years? You weren't really solving relevant problems. I mean, the math is beautiful, and I get that. There's a lot of math that was studied that we didn't have necessarily use for immediately. We tried to apply it, and it didn't quite fit. So Grodwell said, well, you know, it really didn't fit for this maximizing problem. We found something else to put it in. It's called quantitative biology, which I have no idea what that is. It's different from population, at least the population genetics we were talking about here. And Joe Felsenstein knows the difference between this kind of population genetics and quantitative genetics. There is a difference. I need to look up maybe in Wikipedia that'll explain it. But let me just cover some guys who suffered through this session, only to find out that this is a really bad, you know, this is not helping neo-Darwinism, but this is kind of what my goal was. It's like, again, for the creationists in college, I don't want them to be mesmerized by all the math, because some of it really doesn't say anything. And it's kind of hard to believe that. It's like, well, they invested so much time in this, careers, lives, decades, maybe even a century at this point. How could they pour their life into a vain pursuit? And it is kind of hard to believe that they would. And I said, you know, I could be dismissive and callous, or I could just say, okay, just like what we did here, let's consider what the math actually says and what it implies. And I said, okay, so let's maximize the fitness at every loci. What do you get? You get a clonal population. That's the only statement you can make. It doesn't say it's going to evolve complexity. So all that labor is for naught. And I saw that, and I'm just like, am I understanding this? I can't believe people would waste their lives on such a vain pursuit. I mean, really, it was kind of hard to say, you know, am I missing something? I mean, these are smart guys. Why would they do this? And, you know, but the math doesn't lie. So that's where I am. And Dan, Dr. Dan asked, well, it's not totally useless. I'm just like, well, let's grant that. Let's grant that. I'll go with him that far, definitely. And I'll just say, okay, then what solves the problem of evolving complexity? Do we have the math that shows that it's feasible? And my understanding is that hasn't been solved. It's only assumed that it works because we have these phylogenetic trees, but we can't justify it statistically. And that's, you know, and he's been rather open. He said, you described the complexity well, Sal, but I wouldn't go so far as to say we need a miracle to fix it. And I said, yeah. I said, okay, you and I part ways there, but that might be where we're just going to leave it. Dan Straight said smoke and mirrors. Yes, that is a phrase even I used. I said, this looks to me like mathematical theatrics. That being said, I do like math enough, and it has relevance in young Earth creationism. I'll show you the math that I really do like. I have a picture of it right here, because this is a picture of I have it. I'm making business cards. I made one set. I'll show you the picture of the first time I made my business card, I said I'm a math science educator. I misspelled the word science. So I said, well, see, that's why I'm a math science guy, because I can't spell. But this is my card. And you can see there, that's the math that I like. That's helping me understand the distant starlight problem, that equation there. That is what they call a d'Alembert operator that's used in both electromagnetism and general and special relativity. Over here is an amino acid, and this is a Christian symbol. And let me see if I can find the back. Do I have let me just, Emery, while I look for the back of my business cards, if you had any comments.
Not really. As we kind of close out, I will say that the math on your business card makes absolutely zero sense to me. So, at least the population genetics stuff I could at least sort of understand. But the important point, I guess, takeaway from all this is pop genetics, the math itself, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the math, but the math doesn't prove what they want you to think it proves. And a lot of times, I don't think a lot of them are being dishonest. I think they're just repeating what they were told. And I've just from what I was taught in my class, I know the professor who's teaching my class fairly well. He's actually my mentor for my research project. And he's a very nice guy. I'm sure he's never considered the claims of creation one bit. But he, I'm sure he's not intending to deceive. I'm sure that's not his point. But he's just repeating what he was taught. And he said in today's lecture that he's not a math guy. And so I know he hasn't actually looked into the math. He's just thinking that the people who have told him, yes, the math means this, were right. And I think there's a lot of people out there who think that way.
Okay, so now let's say I'm trying to witness to someone like yourself who's a graduate student in biology, and maybe he's not as committed to creationism, or let's say he's wanting to be a creationist, but he's really, he's not talked to people like you and me, and he's maybe struggling. What would I say? It'd be a conversation like what we just had. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, so now you're studying population genetics. Consider what maximizing fitness would do, even if we maximize it every gene locus. Now think about that. Does that really solve the problems that neo-Darwinism is advertised to solve? I mean, we just read it on Wikipedia. It's robust as a theory. Mm-hmm. I said, now that you know what fitness maximization, its aim is, does evolutionary theory look more credible now when you take it to its logical conclusion? And that's what began to hit me. It's like, no. I'm like, this has almost been like a collective delusion. I mean, look at all that powerful, fancy equations. I mean, you could look at Bill Basener's paper, for example, and see the proofs. It's just like magnificent. This got to be true. And you realize, no, there's no guarantee it's true.
Right. The math is mathematically sound and has very little correspondence to reality. kind of like most mathematicians I know. They're mathematically sound and have very little correspondence to reality.
They'll be actually offended if it does, because they want to find something that's higher than reality. It's sublime. No, it's serious. It's just,
I know. That's why I'm laughing.
It's funny. So I found the back of my card here. I'm not showing the part that shows my address and phone number. Back, it's scriptures. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search out a matter. And then my other favorite verse, for this momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And for those of you who've been a part of this channel, you know those are two big themes on this channel. The hiddenness of God hides a few things, you need to dig to find it. It's the glory of God to conceal it. It's to your glory to discover it. And for those who spent time this evening, hopefully you've discovered a little bit. And that you know, our suffering's not in vain. That's 2 Corinthians 4:17. Yeah, thank you. So Emery, I hope this is at least, you know, maybe I hope this has helped you a little bit in your class, give you a different perspective on things.
It actually has. Yeah, it's been very helpful. And I'll be able to hopefully respond more effectively when I get to my homework problems next week.
Oh, it just occurred to me, maybe at the end of class or something, just ask the professor what we just posed. I mean, or even just think about it in your head. But if I were to give an exercise to like I said, to a creationist student who's maybe just kind of wavering like I was 21 years ago, but he had already gotten this far in biology, I'd say, why don't you ask your population genetics professor, is it true that fitness, if we maximize the fitness at every loci, you'd have a clonal population? That should be innocent enough. But I think the implications are pretty sobering if that's the endpoint of fitness maximization. Because the other thing it points out is it's equivocating the idea of maximizing fitness versus maximizing or accumulating complexity. They're not the same thing.
Right.
Accumulating complexity is not the same thing as maximizing fitness in the population genetic sense. There's an equivocation. There's a subtle equivocation there. And I need to keep that in mind when I make my presentation with the faculty.
Yep.
It was a great exercise for me. I can actually clarify and say, do you see the equivocation here? And it's, yeah.
That's pretty much how most evolutionary arguments go. They involve equivocation in some way, sense, form, or another. And I no offense to any evolutionists in the audience, but guys, learn logic. Like, take some time and think about logic and think about how it applies to your own dogma.
So I can kind of understand if I were an evolutionist, I'd give up on population genetics. I'd go back to my phylogenetics.
Yeah. And it makes sense why there's so many people in the phylogenetics category, because there's a lot less math unless you're actually writing phylogenetic methods, which Felsenstein has done some of that too. And
it is a persuasive argument. I think some creationists kind of dismiss it. You know, I don't like losing kind of an argument because I underestimated my foe. And I really do think they have a very good card to play with phylogenetics and patterns of similarity and diversity. That's just my personal opinion, because that's what nearly broke me. Okay. So anyway, why don't we, I'm going to start to wrap up. So these are the verses. I'm going to look for my go-to closing. Emery, while I look for it, do you have any closing thoughts, brother?
No, I think you did a really good job tonight explaining as much as possible, bringing the math down to a level that those of us who are not math people like me can sort of understand. I thought you did a pretty good job doing that, and hopefully it was a blessing to the people in the audience as well.
And let me just pause this a bit. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It didn't quite have the fireworks of the Old Testament debate that I was expecting to be a part of, but that's okay. I felt we accomplished something. Even though I didn't have time really to spare to be doing things like this, I got invited to speak to 20 to 40 faculty members of Christian colleges, including deans, to talk about this paper. And this is kind of a dress rehearsal to kind of also help me re-understand what I had written with my co-authors. It has been a tremendous blessing to be with you all this evening, and also greetings to the viewers who are watching us via recording. So, as been my custom, I'm going to close with this from Rachmaninoff. Emery, if you could, I'll see you backstage. If you could mute yourself right briefly, and after the Rachmaninoff's done, I'll meet you backstage. So it'll be about 3 minutes.